So now that that very first part is done in the CSS Designer, I'll move on and complete page 1. We did the body element. We added lots of CSS code, and I told you that whenever you see a blue link, basically you can go and get more information about it if you click on it. Also, if you don't see a blue link, it means that I've already talked about it. For example, here you'll see that color doesn't have a link. That's because it was already referenced. And as you go down the recipe, the last page, I think, has no more links because everything that we need for this document should have been covered at the beginning. So now we're moving on to, like I said, we're going to do the header element, which is in our page. If I have one page open, it's going to be this one. Our header is on top. That would cover all of this if we wanted to. It's holding currently an H1, a heading 1 that says CSS Designer, and below that the body begins, or rather it's already in the body, but the rest of the document keeps on going. We do have a footer that says copyright at the bottom. It's kind of hard to read, but we're going to be working on that as well later on in the recipe. So what I've been doing so far, though, I did switch over to Atom, and that's great. I do want to still continue to see what's going on as I go along. So every change that I made so far, I'll just copy the whole thing from here and take it to my code pen that I already have open over here, and my CSS. I'll dump it in here. We won't be able to see the images, but we'll be able to see the colors. We'll be able to see the changes in the design as we go, which is important as well. Of course, we can save it here all we want. We just need to bring it back to Atom as we're working. So without any further ado, the header element, like I said, we know it's going to be the, let me minimize this. We know it's going to be this part of the design up here, the CSS Designer heading 1. So in order to get CSS to work with our header, which is one of the many semantic elements, we'll declare the header and open up braces. First thing we want to do, according to the recipe, is to change the font size to 350. So this is going to be large. It's going to be huge, 350%, 3.5 times as large. So we said it was font size, font dash size, colon, 350%, semicolon. And like I said, that is huge. And I don't know that even in our sample, it's not going to be that big. I mean, it's a good size header, but it's not so big as what we're actually looking at right now. This is the original one. This is what it looked like before, but we want it to be not so huge. So what's going on? There must be some sort of a mistake, I'm thinking. Well, let's take a look at the recipe again, and you'll see that the header element, yes, we're changing that, but more specifically, we're changing the H1 selector. So in our code, the H1 selector, let's look at the HTML. It says that CSS Designer is holding the is being held rather by H1, which is inside of the header. So what we're saying is, you know what, that header that actually encompasses everything in between those two tags, let's change that to 350%. So it's just a little bit catastrophic. What we need to do is actually cascade then. We start at the header, but we most specifically don't want to change everything. We don't want to change every single H1 at this point, and although we want to do something inside of the header, we don't want to change the size of the header. So because otherwise it's going to say, okay, well, I'm going to make the text 350 times larger, but then everything inside of the header 350 times larger as well. So we need to cascade the header to say header, and then say specifically H1. if it had been a paragraph inside of that header, then we would specify the P there. And we still could, but we don't have a paragraph. We could have a navigation even. We could have multiple elements, but we're trying to keep it simple just to get things started. Now the CSS Designer H1 inside of header has been fixed, as it were, or at least arranged. We're going to move on to the color and copy this color. And without much drama, that's a simple enough thing. We're just going to say change the color to be what we just copied. Make sure to have a hashtag. Go to the next line. And we now have the padding. That's going to be 40 pixels. And padding left 120 pixels. I told you before that we could start to run into these things with paddings and margins, that we either want the padding to be a certain size all around, or we want it to be a certain size somewhere. Let's begin with the obvious, is that at least 3 sides are going to be 40 pixels. So I could begin easily by just declaring the padding all around, padding colon, to be 40 pixels, px. And so now we have 40 pixels to the left, on top, to the right, and to the bottom. I did add, by the way, in the assignment text, there's going to be a link that you can follow. It goes to CSS links, I believe. Here, remember the order of margin padding, because I know that I repeated. You go to the top, you go to the right, you go to the bottom, you go to the left. Well, in case you forget, you could remember the word trouble for shorthand, and what they say is top, right, bottom, left. You know, if you just pronounce it as trouble, TRBL, then you'll remember what they are. I remember them mostly just because I'm used to doing that order, top, right, etc. Anyway, that's just an aside there. But we said that we were going to, and we did, at least I did, add the padding so that it's all around. Let me close a whole bunch of these windows because they're driving me nuts. There's the CSS Designer, and I'll go back to the code pen. Okay, on to the next line, and know that what's coming is a padding left. And what I meant to say with all remembering top, right, etc. is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. So if it says that the padding left is going to be 120 pixels, which is padding left, by the way, is not the, well, actually it is. I think I used to have left padding, but let's add padding left here, padding left with a dash in between, and say 120 pixels. And sure, that overrides it because it's in order. Let's see what happens if I said padding left before. Nothing. So it goes back because it says, well, you want padding left to be 120 pixels. Padding 40 px, padding all around, overrides it. So either you need to be sure that you have the padding left after, or you do something more practical, which is what I would recommend. If we know that it's 40 pixels all around, that is the same as saying that it's 40 pixels on the top, 40 pixels on the right, 40 pixels below, and 40 pixels on the left, right? And then we want the left to be 120. So top, right, bottom, left. That last number can change to 120 pixels. And then that way, we have just one line of code that covers it all. Moving on to the next thing, let's set the background image to header image1.gif. So back in the assignment, header image1.gif, I'm going to download that, right click, and save the link as. And we'll try to, I move things around so I'm no longer in week 3, but I have a shortcut. This is my website, week 3. Inside I'm going to save this GIF file, and I'm doing that so that I can show you that rather than doing it through Atom, you can do it another way. You can open up your GitHub, make sure that you're in the week 3 folder or whatever folder you're working on. Hopefully, if it's for this exercise, for this class, you're in week 3. And then tell it to add a file. upload file, and you can tell it to choose your files. I'll find that week 3 folder again. It's right here. And header image 1 GIF, it's the people in the header. I will click on open, and then I commit. I can add a comment if I want, just saying added header image. Looks very Reddit-like. Added header image. Commit the changes, and we'll wait a bit. In the meantime, though, you want to look at the recipe again. That what we're doing is actually doing the background image for the H1. We already talked about background image before, so let's look at that in our code pen. We're inside of the header, the whole header. Here, notice how we already have the space that we made. We're going to add the little file there next to it. So we want the background image to be what we just uploaded. Let me spell it correctly. And that is called header image1.gif. I'll just copy this, come back here, put it inside of how did we do the last one? We did it by saying URL parentheses and then the name of the file inside of the quotes. So parentheses, quotes, etc., and then the name header image1.gif, and then close the line with a semicolon. But before I get too happy with this, I know that I did not put in the URL there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and bring it to Atom, just so that I can see what's going on in the local page. I'll save this file, save. I'll stage all of these just because, just so that they move along, and I'll say working on part 2, commit and push. But since that now is saved, oh, push rejected. Probably because there were some things that were moved up there at some point. I'm going to control and push 2 and force it. Since it's just a little file that I'm working on a real project, I would take more care about doing that. But here locally, hopefully if I do this, I can reload the page and see that the CSS Designer was expecting something on the left. That's why we want to put everything on the top and to the left. Otherwise, it's just going to go all the way across. We just need it up on the top and the left, which is why the recipe, the next line says that it should not repeat. That's why we're getting the image all the way across, as it's just repeating it. Sort of like it did with the other background. So we've already covered the do not repeat before. So in our code, there should already be a no repeat, background repeat, no repeat. I'll just go over there and copy it and paste it and save it and reload the page. And now we have that one little image on the left. Going back to the CSS Designer, we're done with that part. Moving on to the container ID for the section element. The section element is a bigger part of the HTML. We have the header that we just handled. Now we have a section. The section then is going to be the container for the page. And this part in particular will have the navigation. That's going to be a column on the left with the buttons that we can see here. And then there will be content on the right. They go from top to bottom, but we'll be moving them left and right as we go along. The recipe says that this ID should have a margin bottom set to 30 so that it gets pushed from the bottom. So before I do anything, I need to declare a container. The container is going to be an ID. So it doesn't really exist. It's something that we're adding to the code. In our styles.css, we will provide it with hashtag container, because that's the ID, and open up the curly braces, and we want it to have a margin bottom of 30 pixels. Semicolon. I'll save that, and I'll copy it just to bring it over to see what it looks like in CodePen. At the very bottom, there's just a little bit of extra space. We can barely see it here because it's a very small change that took place. Next on the recipe, we have the Nav Element, which is where the buttons will live, and they're going to float to the left, and they'll have a width of 150 pixels. So let's declare the Nav Element. This nav is semantic, so it just needs to be declared as such, nav. Open up the curly braces, and we said we wanted it to float to the left, and that's as simple as saying float left. Now all of our design goes from top to bottom and from left to right. You've noticed that how the images flow from left to right. That's just the way they go. If they were repeating, generally they'll go from left to right and they'll go from top to bottom. Now we're floating to the left, and as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have two columns. So this one element with the buttons will be floating to the left of the page, and we're going to have something to the right of it. Now if I told you already that everything flows from left to right, then the next element, whenever it comes, will also be floating to the left. Doesn't make sense at first. Maybe you want something to float to the left and then something else to float to the right so that they'll be side by side. But rather we're thinking more of building blocks where we just stick something to the left and then something once again to the left when the other element is placed. If I had blocks to show you, that would make more sense. So we said we're going to float to the left, and then we were going to give it a small width of 150 pixels. Semicolon. I'll save that. Reload. Not new tab, reload. And here's our little space. We have 150 pixels. It's floating to the left. So this box, once again, this is the box model. We created a new box that's going to have buttons inside. Right now they look like links, and they look like an unordered list because that's basically what they are. And this is what buttons are. Basically, they're part of a list that we need to, dress up a little bit so that they look a little bit better. Our next element is, it's going to be a nav element. We already created the nav element, but we're going to say, hey, inside the nav there should be an unordered list tag that actually makes those look like buttons. So I'll just say we have a nav element that is going to be the UL, and open up the brackets, and we're going to say for this, according to the recipe, that there's going to be a padding of 0, margin of 0, a left style type will be set to none, and the color will be set to something else. Let's start with the easy part. The padding and the margin will be 0 pixels. So we'll just say padding or margin, whichever order, margin 0, and padding is 0. Do I need to specify pixels? If it's 0, I just go without it. Then we said that the list style type should be none. We know that it's an unordered list already, but if we say none, then no marker is shown. What that does is that currently our list has bullet points, and we say get rid of that, no marker. So list style type colon is none. We could also change it to something else. We have the dots right now, but we could have squares, we could have other elements here, circles, etc. But we want none because we want buttons that we're going to create. Semicolon ends the line. The next thing that I do here is what? set the color to this for the text. So I'll copy that and declare the color, colon, and I know that it's a hexadecimal, so hashtag and the color I just copied, semicolon. I saved really quick, go back to CSS Designer and reload. And now we still don't have the buttons, but everything is ready. It's waiting for them. The color has changed, but since this is a link, we can't see exactly what it's going to look like. So I expect that the next thing we need to do is going to be set the link to look like something else. However, that is on page 2. And because I did this for the lecture part, I will do it for you as well. Just keep in mind that you may need to go back and mess with the code a little bit so that it's in the right order. For now, I'm skipping this part, but you need to do it. You need to go back and code all this. I'm going to skip to and do the link and the pseudo class. And that'll be the end of my presentation. Then you need to go back and do the nav element plus everything else. But just because this is a little bit different and I don't want to trick you into falling into a trap, I'm going to set the nav element, which is going to be our link, and that's link is represented by A, as discussed before. It's an anchor. And that's where we're going to set the color to something else, to white. And then we'll be able to see it, because right now we're just dealing with a regular paragraph. So nav element A tells me then that the code should be nav A, curly braces, and we said we changed the color to white. Simple enough. Color, colon, white, semicolon. Keep on hitting that arrow. Then the background color will be this. I'll copy that. Background color, colon, paste, and semicolon, hashtag, because hexadecimal. Once again, the arrow. And blah, blah, blah. And then the padding will be 3 pixels. So a little bit of a padding, just very little padding. Padding, colon, 3 pixels, 3px. Next line. There you go. No arrow now. And we're going to set the right padding to 60 pixels. Now, same dilemma as before. It's already all 3 pixels all around except on the right. So if it's 3 pixels on top, it should be 60 pixels on the right, 3 pixels below, and 3 pixels on the left. And I can't see enough of this because, well, it's the links and we still have not done the links. That's what we're working on. And maybe if I spell nav correctly, I'm not going to steal anything. I'm just going to declare it. Nav with a V. There you go. I reloaded it and now we have some colors. Now we're starting to see what the buttons are going to look like. There's going to be white text, a darker color behind it, and the boxes are getting filled in. So our buttons are beginning to appear. Then I'll say text decoration is none. When I first ran into text decoration a long time ago, I was expecting, well, I guess in case we want a bow or we want a star or something like that. Well, it's just lines. Either you have a line on top, right through it, or underneath. And better yet, maybe none, because we have buttons, so we don't need to underline the text. I'll go back and declare then that the text decoration should be none. Text decoration, colon, none, semicolon, and we've come to the end of that. Now, like I said, this is something that I'll do for this video, but you need to do everything else around it. And that is, I'm going to add a pseudo class. A pseudo class, pseudo meaning fake, and you can read all about it here and in the book as well. What are pseudo classes? It's something to define a special state of an element. What do we mean by state? Well, what about when you put your mouse over it? Will it change color? What if you've already visited something and then it'll change color again? You know, if it's blue, it means it hasn't been visited most of the times. Maybe it'll turn purple afterward. Or style an element when it gets focused. Basically, you're just changing what it looks like at different states, things that have already happened to the elements. Here, we just, since we have buttons, we want them to change color whenever we hover on top. And we're going to set the background color to this whenever the link is being hovered upon. So it's basically the same code, except Nav A will be added a pseudocode tag, which is colon, and we said we're going to hover. And then open up the curly braces and change the background color to this color. And the line with a semicolon, hashtag, save, and I'll go back here, reload, and as I go over, then the color changes. These buttons still don't look like they're going to look in the end, but they're beginning to look like buttons at least, without adding any graphics. Everything is done with CSS, and hence the beauty, the practicality, the need for CSS. I think that's as much as I did with the live class, a face-to-face reunion that we had. Well, virtual, as it were. Everything else, I'll leave it up to you. They're going to be basically same type of steps as we've done so far, but this is the end of this presentation. If you have any questions about anything else regarding any of the tags, any of the code, and why it's not looking like this, ask me a question, shoot me an email, meet me on Slack. Thank you very much.